A strong competency framework first is aligned to the vision and values of your school, your district, or your organization. It's then grounded in that wide-ranging research, like the slide I showed just a couple of times ago, because there is wide-ranging research about what learners need to find not just success, but to really thrive. It's a strong competency framework is transdisciplinary. It is not based on single disciplines, but rather they are the skill sets that live within disciplines, but also between and beyond them. They're a blend of cognitive, social, and behavioral skill sets. And for today, what's most important about these competency frameworks is that they provide the observable progressions that you can put into action at the classroom level. So that competency framework, when it's a strong one, as explained here, will tell us what that development of those skills, of those things you care about, looks like. And it becomes a tool then for designing your projects and learning experiences, but also for measuring them and giving feedback on skill development. So, a competency framework, as we envision it and as we talk about it, follows a structure. The first is you have these broad competencies. Here's an example of Read the World. Each competency is broken down into skills. Each skill is then broken down into the observable indicators at each level. So you get to a small piece like this. I can compare different narratives of the same event and explain how they differ. In the competency framework, we're going to show what that progression looks like to grow from a novice of being able to do that with some guidance, perhaps, to somebody who's doing it in a very skilled and advanced way. I think it's really important to pause for a second and to say, when we're talking about measuring what matters and we're naming what matters lives in profiles of a graduate and competencies and all of these pieces that we've named that you might have or that you might be aspiring to have at your school, that a really important part is that we have to treat competency skills like disciplinary ones. And what I mean by that is I'm going to use the example of multiplication. When we teach multiplication, we are sure that learners get explicit skill instruction of what it looks like and how you multiply. They get time to practice it. They learn to use different strategies and tools from manipulatives to lattice method. They see it in so many contexts and forms. And then they revisit it, right? You're not just, okay, now you can multiply single digit numbers, so you're done. No, we're going to keep expanding and advancing what we can do. And so competency skills deserve that same careful scaffolded progression because that's how we not just measure it, but we make sure we're teaching to it as well. So that's what we measure. What matters? How do we measure? Well, currently we tend to measure with standardized test scores, with looking at things like, did we make it through the curriculum that was planned? We measure in these very, very static ways that may or may not be actually getting to what we're hoping to get to. We also tend to use, if we use rubrics, traditional rubrics. And I want to point out a few things right now to differentiate between the kinds of rubrics that are out there. This is, and by the way, everything in this deck is original to somewhere. So this is a rubric that is out there in the world, in a school, and it is what we consider a traditional rubric. And some of the things you're going to see in this is deficit-based language. There's even in this particular one a column called unacceptable, and you'll see here no or dismal attempt at issue identification. So there's some deficit-based language. The language also tends to be unclear and vague. This says competent but marginally articulated recommendations. I don't necessarily know what that means to have a marginally articulated recommendation, and I imagine a learner would have a hard time with that as well. And the main purpose of a traditional rubric is that it is solely evaluative. We can see this not just in the headers of these levels, but the fact that this is being used as a scoring sheet. Then we have standards-based rubrics. Now, standards can give us really clear, observable language, which is great. But what happens is it doesn't tell us what that progression looks like. So when we turn a standard into a rubric, what tends to happen is we'll have some sort of column called proficient or target or meets, and there we'll put the standards language exactly as it appears. But then we don't know what to do with these other levels. So we tend to do this. We have one column that's like, you're not doing the thing. Then we have another one that's you're kind of doing it, you're partially doing it, or here attempt to do it, which again, that's not really measurable, but partial attempts, somewhat doing the thing. And then we have this other category beyond that standard that we're like, this is really great. And then we try to find the language that will help us say that this is beyond. But again, it tends to be vague. Sophisticated introduction, how is that different than a regular introduction? Insightfully introduces a topic, makes significant. There's a lot of vagueness to this. I want to say, I lived in this world, so I am not coming to you with judgment, but more observation at this point. And once again, these are often used solely for evaluation. Another way to say this is a standards-based proficiency scale goes from you're not doing this, you're not quite there, but we're going to be deficit focusing and point out what's missing. And then we're going to say you're doing it great. And then, wow, you must be gifted, right? With a competency-based rubric, your progressions note at every stage, this is what you can do. This is what you can do. Great job. And look ahead to see what you can be working toward. Okay. So, what does that mean in practice? Well, this is the progression for here you can see this is from the Future 9, by the way, which is reDesign's free, did you hear that part? Free and open source competency framework that went under years of research, piloting, building, and even one iteration since originally published. And so it is there if you need it. But you can use this with any strong framework, but we'll be using the Future 9 for our examples. So the competency is express ideas. Expressing ideas is something we do across disciplines and even outside of school, right? So very broad. The skill is define audience, purpose, and format. Again, we're going to do that across many different spaces. I'm going to take this competency progression of this skill, define audience, purpose, and format, and I will just choose 4 levels in this case. Might be 1 level, could be 3 levels, but in this case, 4 levels that are going to become my rubric. So that becomes this. And you'll notice in a competency-based rubric, all the language is asset-based. If you look at the lowest level here, level 2, it's still written with what the student can do, not what they're missing. So I can decide what I want to create or share and why it's important to me. With guidance, I can choose the audience I'd like to share with, right? So you can become proficient and competent at a level 2, but you're also going to see what's going to change here bolded to move to a level 3. The language is also observable and measurable. We're trying to get rid of that vague language here, right? Did I effectively choose format for my audience and purpose? And it's developmental. And here you're going to see what does it look like to move in this thread from a level 2 to a level 5 in this case. I'm not going to go through this. You will be You will get a copy of this particular chart with the follow-up email that comes out. But do note that we have some criteria for developmental rubrics, and interestingly, they're the same criteria we have for a competency framework. The language needs to be student-facing, identity affirming, observable and specific, developmental, meaning it's not based on age or grade, and it's distilled and research based. We're not just making up what it looks like to develop this skill. Research is telling us what it looks like to develop this skill. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what you do, how you put this together. There are 3 steps. The first one is you need to align the competency skills to your learning experience or task or project or unit. You then need to build the rubric from the competency framework. And during these first 2 steps, you might also be integrating your standards or your content or your disciplinary skills. And then once you have this rubric, you need to calibrate. You need to calibrate with your colleagues to ensure alignment across your institution. So let's look at that first step, aligning skills. And here, I love this because they're likely already there. And one of the things Vicky, my colleague Vicky and I talk about that we love about measuring what matters, this particular lever, is that this is really a way for you to hold what you already do probably really well and just work on alignment and begin to see that. So there is a point in which you're further along a CBE journey where you'll be doing some backward design and you might be starting with a competency skill to say, okay, I really want to develop this skill in learners. What kinds of learning experiences might I create for that? But for most of us, we're going to start with existing things that we do. So, as a former English teacher, I know it's really common to have students read a text and write something about that text, right? So if you do that, well, students might be engaging the read the world skill of engaging in critiquing perspectives and the express idea skills of select and develop my message. It might already be aligned. You don't have to redo your project. If you do mathematical modeling, there's a reason quantitatively skill in the Future 9 called Analyze and Interpret Data. Maybe you teach woodworking. We have a design solution skill called Build Models, Prototypes, or Action Plans. And for all areas, we have a competency called Learn with Purpose. And in this case, maybe there's a skill of monitoring and adjusting. So how do you align competency skills to projects and units? Well, there's lots of ways you can do it. You can just on your own kind of see how things match up. You can work with your team, with others, and together be like, yes, let's align. There's so many skills that align. Let's choose these 3 together. And if you're in Catalyst, you can certainly use our bots. We have some skill mapper bots that can help you align to projects. But you also might need to not just align to a task, but align to some standards that are either required or really important to you. And so I want to show you a way to think about this. So I've chosen a particular competency here, engage in inquiry, and the skill of gather and organize original data. And again, the idea with a competency framework is that these are broad enough that they can apply across disciplines. So this competency skill indicator, so this is one of the indicators from engage in inquiry, gather and organize original data, is I can make observations related to my inquiry and record information using drawings, notes, charts, and/or diagrams. Here is a next generation science standard about making observations about young plants. And so this competency skill indicator can turn into, I can observe how plants grow over time and record my data with drawings and notes in my science journal. Maybe you're using a math Common Core standard, it can turn into I can look at shapes in my classroom and record what I notice about their sides and angles using sketches and notes. Or maybe I can look closely at a historical map and record what I notice by writing down details and drawing symbols to show the patterns I see. So what you're going to see here is that a competency framework does not require you to verbatim use the same language all the time, but it does require you to attend to what that skill indicator is trying to measure, right? And if we look here, what it's trying to measure is making observations related to something you're studying and recording the information in some way. And all of these do that. So when you do this, how do you do this? Well, again, you can do it by yourself, with others, all those things. We have integration process guide for people who want to do it as a team manually. We also have a prompt guide for people who want to prompt AI. And we have a bot. And I'm going to show you that bot actually as a way. And I've prompted it a little bit ahead of time, just the inputs. So I'm imagining a past life. I am an 11th grade English teacher. I have this ELA literacy standard. And my students, I'm just saying, here's the standard. And my students are reading Their Eyes Were Watching God. And all I want to understand here are like which of those future 9 skills might relate and what can I learn from that? Oh, it wants my name and I'm going to give it to it. So it's going to tell me, okay, this is what I understand. And it's going to tell me some skills that might relate to this. And I'm kind of interested in this one. So it's giving me some to choose from. Maybe I don't know this, but it's giving me some ideas and it says what best resonates. I'm going to say engage and critique perspectives. And here it's going to suggest, based on the theme and development of the text, that level 5 might be a good start. Now I can tell this, no, actually, let's look at level 3 or level 4, but it gave me a start of level 5. And here it's telling me like these are the indicators from level 5. Does this resonate or do I want to go higher or lower? And I say, this looks good. What it's going to do now is not just tell me, here's an aligned skill and the indicators that relate, but it's going to look at that standard I put in there and it's going to break down those level 5 indicators for me to look at the ways, the things I can do with learners to help them get those skills, right? So those level 5 indicators of engage and critique perspectives, when put into the context of that Common Core ELA standard and the text we're reading, it's going to say, well, here are some ways to unpack it. Theme, identification, and analysis. Historical and cultural context and connections. Author and context analysis. Do I have to do all of these things with learners? No, but when I do any of these, I know it's connecting to that skill, to my standard, and to my content. So this is just a really quick, fun bot that I like because I feel like it helps me learn and understand my skill competency framework better as I'm working. I'm going to go back. Oh, wait, I'm not going to go back. Well, I am going back, but I'm going to pass the baton. No, yes. No, it's still me. It's still me. I tried to give it to Vicky. She said no. Okay, so building rubrics. So we've aligned, we know that there are skills from our competency framework tied to the work we're doing. Now, how do we build it? Well, I showed you one way, which is literally just copying the language over and just using your competency framework as is and saying, here you go. but we can also adapt it, right? So here's a context. Imagine you have elementary students and they're working on understanding fractions as parts of a whole, and they're using pattern blocks to explore that. So a teacher, group of teachers might look at the reason quantitatively competency, land on the represent and communicate ideas mathematically, and uh, or communicate information mathematically. And they kind of like this level too. But you'll note, and this is purposeful, right, is that the language doesn't give the context. And it uses a lot of and ors because it wants to make sure the context can be big enough. So I might look at this and say, this is right, but I need to give it the context. So I change it. I can draw pictures and or use objects to record what I see and or to explain my thinking. Turns into I can use pattern blocks to figure out and explain my thinking about parts of a whole. Same thing here. Making choices and features around visual representation to show something important. I'm still talking about making choices around visual representation to show something important, but now I'm naming what those are. So this is an adapted way to use the framework. And I don't have to stop there. Maybe I want to do some of those learn with purpose skills here. And here I do just copy and paste these, right? These are the same words. I'm going to put those here. And then let's imagine I have a group that has not been taking very good care of the environment, and I want to add my own thing, unrelated to the competency framework, standards, anything. This is important in my context. I want to have a little class stewardship thing, so I do that. And here I have developed now a single point rubric that is pulled from my competency framework and can allow me to measure what matters, right? Let's go older. Your juniors are writing a philosophical argumentative essay. There are really specific writing conventions that they need to adhere to. And we're really focusing on those express idea skills. I'm not going to go into it, but you will get access to these. We have a sample rubric of what that can look like to be completely skill based, but you can see that blue where there's some context given in or put in. And then we've pulled out some things that maybe really don't belong in a rubric, but they often do. I think about the standards and conventions that really are you do them or you don't. So the one I see frequently, and again, also used to use, is citations, right? On one end of the rubric is you did not use citations. On the other end is you used citations correctly throughout. And then in the middle, there's some bit of you did some citations correctly, or you did some of your citations, and it becomes this scale. But in actuality, we don't want to scale. That's the kind of thing where we either are like, yes, you are using citations correctly, you're doing great, or you don't have them, and let's work on them. It's really not a scale. And so those can go onto a checklist. How do you do this? How do you build these rubrics adapted? Well, again, you can build them from scratch. You can use prompt engineering with AI. It can be really good. I will have a caveat here. If you're a Catalyst member, we have a prompt list for this, so you can use whichever Gen AI you want. If if you are just doing this on your own, I think the important thing to remember is that AI, its background information is based on, 100 years of traditional rubrics, the ones that have deficit-facing language, the ones that have vague language, and it will on its own produce very similar rubrics. So you have to do a lot of kind of back end work to get it to create the kind of rubrics you want. Just a note there. We do have a rubric co-designer, and I'm going to show you that. Um, I set this up. I wanted to do something a little different here. So I uploaded a very traditional lesson plan from a math class. This is not a project. This is a very traditional math lesson. And I wanted to do this because I think it's important to note that even if you are not in a spot where you are ready to do like big competency aligned projects, you can still move towards skill aligned rubrics. I hope this works. It should work. Okay, so that's what's in there. Here's my name. And let's see what we get. I want to shout out Vicky for being an incredible bot builder. So this is a really good question. It wants to confirm, do I want the rubric to assess the mathematical processes and reasoning, or do I want to focus more broadly on some other skills? In this case, I'm going to say I want to focus on mathematical process and reasoning. And it's noting, and you can see it's pulling out the lesson's focuses on graphing linear equations, identifying slopes and intercepts, and it's looking and it's saying here are three things that tend, that seem to connect, and it's suggesting a level 3 for this work. So I'm going to say pose and solve problems. I don't want my rubric to have all of this. I'm focusing on one skill, pose and solve problems. Um, It's going to go levels 2, 3, and 4. I could have earlier there, I didn't spend a lot of time responding, have told it to do a different progression. It's pulling the relevant indicators. It's saying maybe all the indicators aren't necessary, and then it's asking me, do I want all of those? I'm going to say all these indicators. And then it's going to begin to solve or to create it. And it's going to do it here, but it's also going to put it in a copy and paste. And it says, do I want to add specific state standards or Algebra 1 content specific language? Yes, please add the context of my lesson. Let's say content. And then it will update it. And you can see how it's beginning to now rephrase it. So now I can rephrase a simple problem about slopes or intercepts in my own words and break it down, right? So this we now have a skill aligned, standard aligned, content aligned rubric. I'm going to hand it over to Vicky.
Cool. I'm so glad that bot worked. It's a tricky one. Okay. Trina's walked us through aligning competency skills with the task or project and then using the learning progressions to design developmental rubrics to measure those skills. So next up is using rubrics beyond just measurement and assessment. Because of the careful way that the learning progressions from which rubrics are crafted in this approach that we've been talking about, because of the way those progressions have been designed, these rubrics provide stable, transparent criteria for teaching and learning throughout the process. Before learning, teachers share rubrics and their student-friendly indicators to articulate expectations of what the learning ahead looks like. And students begin with clarity on what growth and success look like. During learning, teachers use the rubric to guide ongoing, precise feedback, and students receive just-in-time guidance. Students use the rubric to monitor and self-assess their work. Um, they feel empowered to make adjustments and revisions, and they use the rubric to identify, where am I now, and where do I want to go next? And through these practices, they're building metacognition, self-reflective, self-regulated learning, um, self-efficacy, and the confidence that comes with all that. Students are using the rubric to give quality feedback to each other that's structured and tied to their learning goals. And through this peer assessment, they cultivate a culture of care and learning in the classroom. After learning, teachers use the rubric to support reflection on both product and process. Um, and they help students to develop a mastery orientation through this reflection and celebration, um, to value learning for learning, growth over grades. And teachers also can use the rubric over time for progress tracking to collect evidence of growth across many tasks. And students can see their learning progress, not just, point in time snapshots. And that helps them to build motivation and persistence.
Can I add something
So,
here, Vicky?
oh, absolutely.
The thing that's interesting about progress tracking here is that one of the benefits of using a shared competency framework and building your rubrics off of that is that the same skills are being measured, not just in one class or one context, but over time across many courses, many contexts. And so it makes progress tracking very different than a traditional school where everybody's building their own rubrics that are really content product specific. And so that to me was a really big aha moment as a former school administrator.
Okay, now that we have transparent, stable criteria by which to set goals, measure student growth, provide feedback, how do we ensure that we're evaluating student work consistently and fairly? First, let's look at how you know when someone's competent. If you have been to our other webinars, this will be familiar, but we define competency as an observable set of related skills that attend to the whole human, cognitive, behavioral, and social. And competencies allow for the effective use of content, facts, information, data, and tools, meaning they can transfer and apply across content and subject areas. So, how do you know when someone is competent? Well, when they can successfully undertake a complex task multiple times in multiple contexts, independently and with automaticity. So then demonstrating competency multiple times over multiple contexts requires aligned ways of measuring. Um, Horizontally between grade level teachers and disciplines, we need to align, and vertically from year to year, grade level to grade level, we need to align. So how do we do this? Well, the best place to start is almost always closest to the learners. Um, so calibration, learning to analyze student work in a fair, accurate, and consistent manner across a team requires a lot of practice and reflection, ongoing conversation and collaboration with colleagues. Um, there's really no other way to ensure consistency across the team in the school than to engage in calibration, and to help norm rating practices among teachers. So instructional teams need common, mutually agreed upon practices to build alignment when evaluating student work. And this involves common rules. So scoring work gets a bit technical, and it's important to make sure everyone's on the same page on things like what does it mean to earn a rating for a particular performance level, or what learners need to show and which student work gets rated, which does not, when does scoring happen. Those kinds of rules are great to set, are important to set from the beginning. And then there's common tools for shared learning around scoring and uh, transparent scoring across teams of, the same artifacts. Um, so practicing the calibration, and then common protocols that help guide teams through scoring, discussing, and the rating process. Um, and uh, Okay, so to calibrate themselves, an instructional team will need not only shared rules, tools, and protocols, but dedicated time for reviewing, scoring, and discussing student work. It might sound simple, but it really leads to important discussions about learning among teams. So it's critical to prioritize this collaborative work among teachers. So, what systems, practices, and policies do you have in place to support collaborative scoring?
I just lost Vicky. Antonia, do you have Vicky?
I don't.
Okay.
She's
I don't know what happened. Um, I will jump in here, although Vicky would be a much better leader of this slide. But this is the idea of calibration does isn't just the responsibility of teachers, right? Leaders need to create a systemic culture for calibration. Um, and consistency matters. We all have a role to play here, from uh, having those rules, those shared protocols, those shared practices, those shared tools, and that you have a strong competency framework to begin with to work from. I'm going to turn it over to Antonia. And Antonia, you're muted still.
sorry. So there's been a few questions in the chat. Please feel free to answer more. Uh, Chris, I meant to answer yours quickly in the chat, but I hit the wrong button. But you'd asked if the rubric can become a 3-point, can become a 4-point rubric if we use, and the answer is yes, very easily. Yeah, it's just a matter of changing some of the back end prompting. So that's simple. Some of the questions, um, Ken, I think I did answer your question. Um, so yeah, but feel free to follow up if the answer was not if it leads to more inquiry. All right. Any other additional questions? Things you're wondering about. So today was really a focus on how do we begin noticing and working on um, using rubrics to support both learning and assessment inside the classroom. And there's a future webinar where we'll begin thinking about how does this tie together across the school so that you can begin actually tracking uh, competency development at a school or district or even a statewide level in order to uh, begin to say kind of, my fifth graders are on track or my eighth graders are on track or my 12th graders are ready to graduate. That moves to a system-wide set of structures. Today was really about what does a classroom teacher need to do in order to begin really thinking about how do I help learners understand where they are and how they could move forward. All right, so let's talk. So we mentioned Catalyst a few times. I'm just going to do a couple of quick notes on that. Some of you are already familiar with this. So the first thing is please connect if you feel like within Catalyst, measuring what matters is a learning pathway that people can begin to explore and practice and use with some coaching and support, resources, etc. Um, uh, and and then there are other learning pathways for every part of our CBE blueprint where people can work on pedagogy, they can work on flexible grouping, they can work on scheduling, there's a whole range of different pathways for each aspect of CBE. So I'd love to chat with you, tell you more about it. We have a really wonderful group of schools right now that are working with us there. Okay. To that end, we have a leader sprint, which is within Catalyst, a group of anywhere from 1 to 3 leaders can join together from within a school to work in a very targeted way over a 3-month time period with a goal that they are interested in and begin to get some traction around it and bring it to life in 3 months. All right, we're continuing the webinar series through the year, actually. We just planned the full scope for the year. And next month, we'll be looking at 5 proven practices that are pedagogical. And so they're very powerful for CBE, but they're also just really good pedagogical practices, research informed and very much organized around helping you develop uh, core skills within the classroom, whatever the learner's age. And I think that's it. You can find us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We have 2 different newsletters. One is for CBE Catalyst Insights, and we always present the one for September will be on measuring what matters. We'll present some new resources. We will share a problem of practice and how somebody is working through it. And then the reDesign monthly updates will just tell you about things that we're working on, things that we're exploring, new research we're doing, all of those kinds of things. So we'd love you to join if it's of interest, and if you want to get a sense of what it's like before you sign up, you can look at our Catalyst newsletter briefly and get a sense of whether that's helpful. We have been sharing our bots, one bot in almost every newsletter, just so people can play and explore AI tools that are really designed to be competency-based and learner-centered. There's not that much out there that actually does that. And so we're really trying to build up a resource hub of AI tools that will actually get to some really good practice that are both learner-centered and competency-based.
And I'll add that Catalyst members have access to all our bots. And then we do try to still share, as Antonia said, one in a webinar and one in the newsletter. But yeah, we have a whole arsenal of bots.
That's great. Um, Trina, Ken O'Connor has a question that I'm just curious at how you might respond to it. Um, it, I think it might be a philosophical difference, but I'm not positive. The Ken was making a distinction between a learning progression and an achievement progression, and my response was, we see those as the same. Um, and but I'm interested, and Ken, we can unmute you also, so you can just ask specifically. if you're here still.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I guess I summed it up in the last one that I put in the chat. It seems to me what your rubric says is you can do X, Y, or Z, but it doesn't say how well you can do it. Your descriptors could be done brilliantly, they could be done poorly, or they could be done anywhere in between. That's why I suggest they're learning progressions, not achievement progressions. Achievement progressions take, say, one of those I cans and say, this is how it's done. You can do better, or this is doing it as in a novice way. This is how you do it in a proficient way, and this is how you do it in a better than proficient way.
Yes, so we would agree. And so here's where a strong competency framework comes in because that's exactly what the progressions do. They'll show, again, with research, what it looks like to develop that skill. So the problem that we sometimes see, right, is based in a lot of those traditional or standards-based rubrics where it's like, I kind of do this or I don't do this, but it doesn't actually show you how well you can do it, right? And so the progression will say, yes, you can do this part, this small piece of something. You can't necessarily do those other pieces yet, or you would be moved along the progression. I don't want to like busy the thing by going through going through my drive right now, but I'd love, Ken, if you haven't seen the Future Nine as just an example, I'd love for you to have that because what you will see is that it does this very thing. It tells you um, what you can do, and it's identifying what you can't. Now, in a single point rubric, or a multi-point rubric, this is where teacher feedback and in conferencing and feedback is going to be really important to say, yes, like you could do it, but there was a lot of support that was needed to get you there, which is why you're still at a level 2, which says with guidance, or to give some nuance because again depending on your task and the context in which it is, I 100% agree there's some piece of giving nuance to what we try to make as very concise in a rubric, and this is true of rubrics everywhere. We don't want a multi-page rubric given to a student, so it's got to have a bit of being concise to it, and we as this is why I say AI will not replace educators because we need to give that nuance and that feedback to say very much what you're talking about. What does it look like exactly? And where are the small pieces that are going to help you get to that next level? I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I don't have Future Nine, so I guess I can just look it up on your website, right?
Yeah, we'll drop a link in for you.
Thank you.
All right. Debbie, I love your questions. I just been uh yes. Yeah, Allison, absolutely. The question of we have to look, part of the reason to do these rubrics in this way is because of the need to give students opportunity to practice and learn um, competencies in multiple contexts multiple times. And so it's one of the reasons why competency frameworks that are tied to discipline content, so if you say I have US history or history competencies and I have English competencies and I have math competencies, you've very significantly narrowed the number of contexts that students can show you their developing competency. You've really limited it to a single context of a discipline. And most of the way we use skills in the real world is not that way. Unless you happen to be, a biology professor or researcher and working on, the next great whatever. Like there are some very specific content focused fields of study, but most of us are in interdisciplinary contexts that require us to think in some pretty broad ways. So we do want to try and build rubrics that allow both for, I can show you I know some content deeply, and I can also show you I know these skills, and I can show you these skills in my social studies class, my community service project, my playground experiences, uh, my church, if that's allowed. So looking for all the different ways you can honor students developing competencies and talk to them about what that looks like so that they can get mental models together that they can use, not just in a single classroom with a single teacher.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We hope this was helpful, and there will be a recording of this as well as some of the resources that get sent to your inbox shortly. But you can always ping me, Vicky, or Antonia with any questions that you have, and we'd love to chat.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody.